I have the scene set up. Let's talk about area of effect. So let's go ahead and talk about the scene that I have set up here. I just have a couple static bodies to represent a group of enemies. Now, of course, these could be rigid bodies, character bodies. If you're using older versions, kinematic bodies. Doesn't really matter what it is. Point is, we have some kind of visual representation here on the screen. And right above each of them, they have a texture progress bar, which is representing the amount of health that they have, maximum of 100, and we could subtract off of that. You can, of course, go fancy with it and use tweens to have this smooth transition instead of something that's instant. And as you can see here, I'm showing the debug collision shapes, and that's just up in the debug menu. Is where you can find that and turn that on. My circle here is my area of effect that I want the damage to happen. So maybe a projectile hit in the center here, and then it spawns this explosive radius. And when I hit the enter key, is going to be my simulation of the AoE being or happening. And as you can see there, they all took a different amount of damage because it depends on how close they are to the center point of the explosion, because naturally the closer you are, the more damage you would take. And of course, the one on the outside of the sphere or the circle completely in the top left took 0 damage from this. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at how to set that up. So all of my characters here, they all share the same little script, and all that is they have a variable for their health set at 100. And I have my health bar that I'm getting here. They all have a function called take damage, and I'm just passing in an AoE bool and a from object. The from is going to be our AoE impact location, so you can change this to impact point if you wanted to. And then our logic is all going to run inside of this if statement. In this case, so all I'm doing is, if we have an area effect, so if that gets passed in as true, and we have a from object, right, a point from point of some type, then we can go ahead and calculate the distance. So for this, it's of course going to be a float, because that's what gets returned, and we're going to get, our character is going to get his own global position, or should I say the enemy is going to get his own global position, and he's going to get and calculate the distance from himself to our impact point position. And based off of that position, now of course these numbers of course are going to be dependent on each of your own AoE objects. For example, an explosive from maybe a fireball or a bomb. Maybe you just have an explosive barrel. Maybe another time you have a gas grenade. So you're going to have a damage over time situation going on there. All of these can have completely different areas of effect that you might want to use. So the range that you would need to consider is going to be vastly different. So we're calculating the distance, and then we're checking, if the distance is less than or equal to 100, then we're going to deal with this much damage and show that in our health bar. Then I do the same thing with 200, do this damage, reflect it, 300 damage, reflect it. And the last one, I think with this you can get just a little over 300, so you get like 302, 305, 310, something like that, right on the edge, the circle edge. So if it's just over 300, then I'll just subtract this amount and reflect it at the end of the day. Now you can make this as complex as you want. You can have as many different distance variations that you want in here, or you don't have to have any distance variation. You can just flat out deal a flat number if you wanted, as long as they're within the radius, which is fine. It's just that all comes down to yourself and your design decisions. Now the flat number 50 here, of course, you could always do some kind of math if you don't want to do a flat number. What I'm just doing a flat number here, obviously, just to make things easier to show you. And for the most part, this is the bulk of it. So all we need to do now is we need this function to be called on our enemy, assuming that they are within range. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to my AoE explode here, right, my circle, and that's just an area 2D, and it has a collision shape. And the collision shape is set to disabled by default in this case. I've just marked it as red just so it would be, so we can distinguish it clearly from everything else. As you can see here, I'm just going to disable it again. And the script in here, I simply have my damage area, which is my collision shape. And in my case, I have it when I press enter, but you would have this when an object or your projectile collides with something, right? Normally, if you were to do something like a bullet in a space shooter, or a vertical scroller, the bullet would hit, or your projectile would hit, you would deal damage, and it deletes itself. Or in this case, we would, instead of dealing damage and deleting itself, it would spawn in its own area of effect. Or if you put the area of effect on your projectile, it's going to activate that and stop moving, of course. So in my case, I'm just doing it when I hit enter, and I'm going to check if not the damage area is disabled. So if it is currently active, then we're not going to do anything. We're just going to return and exit out. This is going to prevent us from spamming it. So you'll see if I come here and I go to set this to 3 seconds and I come in here, you can see I can go like this. I can keep spamming it. The health is not going to go down and nothing's going to happen. It's going to wait until the time runs out and then it'll deactivate. Then I can activate it again. But if I did not have this guard clause in here, right, then when we run it, you can see I should be able to, for the most part, just completely spam things. Oh, and we saw there with the double flash in there. Whoops, my mistake. I saw that with a double flash in there, but this await is kind of acting as that kind of safeguard. Real quick. So I'm basically just putting both of these in just so we can be safe. Now, realistically, you wouldn't have 3 unless maybe you're doing like a smoke cloud or something. So I'm just going with a 0.2. That, and that's where you see it like this, where it can kind of be spammed off of that time limit just because it's so short, but obviously you're not going to be able to spam it like that, right? Because this is normally something that's going to come out off of your projectile. So and with that, that's all I have there. So I'm just activating the collision area, right? The collision shape. Now for the on body entered signal, I've connected that to itself. And all I'm doing is I'm calling take damage on the body. Now, you would of course need to make sure this is a body that obviously you're interacting with, so you might want to look at your layers and masks with that, but you want to make sure that it has take damage, so maybe you want to use the has function here, right? So maybe you want to be like body has method, and then maybe you can check the take damage, right? So you can say if body has take damage, then call it, which would be fine in itself if you want to go that route. You could also check it, maybe the body is just in a specific group because everything in that group might have that function or might have that take damage. However you want to go about that to clarify and make sure that you don't going to run into an error is up to you. There's many ways of going about these things, but the main thing here is that we're calling that take damage on that body, and I'm passing in true and self. Remember, if we come in and we take a look, can I get the arguments to pop up? No, it's not going to. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll just, oh yeah, that's not working either. So I'll just come over here. So remember, our first argument is AoE. So if this is an area of effect, which we passed in true, and we're checking for the from, so if we have an object or a distance, which we are, we're passing in our self, right, which is our own area 2D, which is the center of our explosion point. So we pass both of those in. Then we calculate distance. And then based off of that distance, we deal whatever damage it is we want to do. So I'm going to show you an example here of using this with a projectile. So obviously on our AoE explosion, we don't need any input in this case, because all this, instead of us handling it, it would be handled by the explosion, right? The projectile, I should say, when it collides. So in this case, we're going to move our chunk of that into our ready function, so that when this our AoE is put into our scene, we're going to make sure set disabled is set to false. Now, of course, you could always just not have your explosion or not have your radius disabled at all. And if you can do that, then you can basically remove this line here and just keep these two, if that's what you wanted to go with. It's perfectly acceptable. But since mine is disabled by default, I've got to change my disabled property. Again, I have my small timer here for how long the explosion is there, or how long the explosion is dealing damage. And then I'm just going to have it delete itself, right? Queue free. Don't need this bottom line. So our ready function just has these three simple lines now for our projectile, or sorry, not our projectile, for our AoE explosion. And I've gone ahead and I've right-clicked it and selected Save Branch as Scene. So now I've got it right over here, and I just reset the position back to its default here up in the corner. Now, I've gone ahead and I've created my little projectile here, and it's going to move across the screen, and it's going to collide with this guy here. When it collides, it's going to have its explosion. So this has its own script, and I have an area 2D for my detecting the collision with the enemy here. And I'm just using a body entered signal, just like we used before. And on this script, I have my speed, whether or not it's an AoE attack or an AoE projectile. In my case, I have it set to true. I have an enum here for my AoE types, so I know specifically what AoE damage to spawn in. I have explosion and I have gas. My type is explosion, so I know what to do here. Here are my ready and process. I'm just setting my projectile to move across the screen at a nice steady pace. And then inside of our body entered signal, this is where I can go in. I can match my type. And I can check, is it an explosion type? Is it a gas type? And I can do whatever block of code is responsible for that. So in my case, it's an explosion type. So what I'm doing is I am creating my variable of an explosion. That is a packed scene, if you didn't know. And I'm just loading in that AoE explode scene, right? This one that we had here, that we moved over and saved on its own. There you go. I've gone ahead and I'm loading that in. And then I'm creating my explosion instance for that, which is an area 2D, because in my case, area 2D is the root of that scene. And I'm instantiating it, explosion.instantiate. And then I'm going to set the position of it, which is important. So I'm setting the global position of my explosion instance, and I'm setting that to self.global position. And what that's doing is that's taking our explosion circle, right, our radius of damage, and I'm placing that at my point of impact where my projectile hit. And now I'm just using getTree.root.addChild, and that's just adding it into the scene real quick. And of course, once it gets added, if you know the rules, then that's when ready will trigger, which will enable my collision area here. On our area of effect, wait its 0.2 seconds to timeout, and then it's going to delete itself. And as for our projectile, once it's done all of that, right, it's done matching its type, this whole block, it exits out of there, it's done everything it needs to do, then the projectile is going to delete itself. So if we go ahead and play this now, you can see there's our projectile coming in. It's going to hit this guy. It's going to spawn the explosion radius. Boom. And as you can see, our top left, he got a little bit of damage. Our right corner here took a little more damage. And then the one here at the center point took a lot of damage. Now, of course, we can play with this and we can see that it is spawning correctly in our position. So if I take my projectile, I want the whole projectile. So if I take the whole thing, move it down here, and we'll even put it here just to speed it up a little bit. I could change the speed, but that's fine. When we see it slowly moving in as a projectile. Now remember, this could be a bullet, it could be a fireball, it could be a grenade, it could be whatever you want. All right, and it's gonna hit, collide, boom, it exploded. Dealt tons of damage here, a little bit here. I think we might have been safe on this one, and we're definitely safe up top again. All right, so we're getting something similar to what we had before. So if you were a little confused on how to add that to a projectile, hopefully that clears it up. The main point is basically just spawning it here on collision when your projectile hits an enemy. And your AoE it's going to call that take damage on anybody who's inside the area damage, and the enemy for its take damage is going to check if it's an AoE and we have not a point of origin, right? Calculate the distance and deal damage based off of that distance. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. I feel like that might have been a little bit, so I kind of wanted to just quickly jump over that again. But all right, with that, take care, and I'll see you guys in the next one next week. Hopefully I don't forget to edit out the thing, but if you don't know, then it's not going to matter anyway. I just want to note in there that if you're seeing this error down here at the bottom and you're curious what that is, it just wants me to use call deferred here. Let's just go in, call deferred. Add child would be a string in this case. Second argument would be our explosion instance, and that should get rid of that error that was down there. And we should see that here just real quick. And if we just give it a moment, it goes on in, hits. Debugger should stay at 2, it should not hit 3. Perfect, there we go. So if you're confused about or worried about that down there, that's all it is. It's just saying that I needed to use call deferred for my add child here. And if you're curious about these, just saying, hey, body and delta is never used, that's fine. Use underscore there, perfectly fine. And let me just change this to 500, super speed that up. Boom. There you go, we're done. No errors, no debugs. All right, take care, everyone.